Hello, everybody. Kevin Glennon here. Going to jump right into my Module 2 presentation project. For my topic, I chose inclusive language, and as we'll talk in a few moments, this stuck out as interesting to me. Uh, I was in the workforce for over 10 years, and I saw firsthand instances of biased and exclusive language being used. So to look at it from an academic lens and from the perspective of a copy editor, it was interesting to me. So this is just kind of a brief overview of the topic. I'm still, by all accounts, a novice when it comes to some of the deeper aspects of this topic, but I had a good time researching it. Found a lot of cool references, tools, and tips, stuff that I hope you find interesting, and stuff that I'll certainly be using going forward. So, what is inclusive language? Dictionary.com has a kind of a wordy definition, but it hits the nail on the head. It's language that avoids the use of certain expressive words that might be considered to include particular groups of people, especially gender-specific words such as man, mankind, and masculine pronouns, the use of which might be considered to exclude women. Um, this kind of goes heavy. This definition goes heavy on the gender side of it, but as we'll see going forward, this covers race, religion, sexual orientation, a whole slew of different areas, and just things that as copy editors we need to be mindful of. So why did I choose this topic? Again, I've been out there in the workforce for 10 plus years. I've seen tons of examples of unintentional usage of outdated words and phrases. Um, work emails from staff to staff, from upper management to staff, memos and directives that are all internal to the company. Those are, finding instances of it, in those areas are bad enough. But this last part, company literature, this is stuff that's external. It's going out to customers, whether to sell something, to inform them of something. And as copy editors, we can't assume that every casual reader is going to miss or gloss over the use of some language that might be biased or exclusive. In fact, we have to assume that everybody out there is going to be reading this and can catch any one of these instances. And if it's stuff that as copy editors we find that an individual might find offensive or exclusive, we need to catch that. We need to have a conversation with the author of the text that we're editing. And this isn't a time to harp. We don't need to get on a soapbox and talk down. It's understanding. I mean, that's the one term we have to use or be mindful of through this entire lesson is understanding. We have to understand where they're coming from. We have to try to make them understand where we're coming from if we do find that language might be offensive or exclusive, uh, and just kind of find the middle ground there and make sure that the end result is the best possible version of that text that can be sent out. So again, it was more of a pet peeve of mine in the workplace, just like grammar mishaps. I was always that person that would read an email, sent from anybody in the company, and the punctuation would be off, the capitalization, spelling, all that stuff. I would always scoff at it. But the same with instances of this language, I would always see that stuff. So now to be able to look at it again as an academic and maybe even as a professional whose job is to catch stuff like this, it's exciting to me. So let's look at the perils of non-inclusive language. This is simply put, it excludes. It literally excludes a person, persons, an entire race, an entire gender, an entire religion, all of that stuff. And it's culturally we're making so many advances, for cultural understanding in recent years. And this is just another area that we need to be mindful of. And as copy editors, we kind of have the power to spread awareness of it. So I want you to look. There's an example I found while I was looking at part-time jobs on Indeed.com. So I'll bring up the image. I'll give you a couple seconds to read it, and then I'll chime back in. All right. Hopefully you can see my pointer here. So again, it's your basic job posting. So we see here it's maintenance, security, yada yada. Everything looks okay, but we get down to this very last sentence. This person needs to be willing to work and have his own tools. So that's the glaring problem right there. That one word now separates half of the qualified people from applying for this job. There could be plenty of women out there who are qualified, have their own tools, and are looking at this posting and they're about to click apply now, and they might see that and think, oh gosh, either A, they're offended and don't want to apply for this job, or B, They literally think, well, it's got to be a he. I'm not qualified. There's no way I can apply for it. So when you look at some of the parts, maintenance, security, assuming that whoever wrote this, it kind of has an outdated belief because in past, maintenance security might be looked at as a position that is male dominated. But again, it's 2018. There are tons and tons of qualified people from all genders, races, religions that could and should be able to apply for this job. So again, this is just one simple, kind of day-to-day example of this that I found. But here, this one simple word is excluding many, many people who are qualified from applying for this job. So simply switching this from his to their um, fixes that problem. Again, me personally, I don't think that whoever wrote this was intentionally meaning that it's got to be a he. I just think that that's, unconsciously when they were writing this out, that's just the word that came out. That's just the word that they're used to using. So again, as copy editors, we have the position to go ahead and catch this. Hey, look, is this what you mean? Or can I suggest maybe using this other word that would be a little bit more inclusive and maybe get your message out there a little clearer? So going forward, what can a copy editor do to help? At the core, copy editors should be looking for and investigating anything that could be wrong in any way. This isn't just looking for technical problems, but also tonal and target audience issues. What I mean by that is just like that previous example, target audience. Is the target audience all men? I highly doubt that. And if it's not, then we need to go ahead and fix the verbiage to reflect that and to be inclusive of anybody and everybody who could get their hands on and read that job posting. And that goes for any other piece of literature or text that is being sent out, and that as copy editors we are receiving and trying to catch these issues. So again, be on the lookout for unconscious bias. It's presumably more often than not that a writer doesn't intend for their language to be exclusive. Again, it's just people become so comfortable with words that they've used and heard used their whole lives. And this goes back again to that dictionary.com definition of words ending in men or man, or saying his, just like that job posting that we saw. It's not often that these texts are supposed to just go to men. There could be instances of those, but again, more often than not, it's just their reflexive, natural way that they're writing it, and we are that safety net as copy editors to catch it, bring it back, and say, "Hey, is this what you meant? And if not, let's get it fixed." Do your own research, and a little bit later in the presentation, we'll look at some resources and references, but simple Google searches. There are tons and tons and tons of resources out there that we as copy editors can rely on, in our free time. It doesn't have to be a case by case basis. This is stuff that we should be constantly educating ourselves on, constantly looking up, constantly staying up to date on, because language changes, language evolves. 1 year from now, there could be a word that we use now that is recognized as proper and correct, as far as being inclusive. That could change. So we need to stay on top of this. We need to stay aware and stay educated on it. Query away. Okay. This is another topic that we talked about in Module 2, but it fits here. Really, it fits basically over every topic we have covered. The copy editor and the author need to have a dialogue going. And again, this doesn't need to be one where we're making them feel bad for their word choice, for technical issues. We just need to understand what it is that they are trying to say versus what it is that they're saying. And if there are inconsistencies or areas that need fixing, this is our way to find it. And again, this is a way of creating an understanding between the two parties, so that once this text reaches the eventual target audience, that they understand it fully too. Open up. So again, here's that understanding word. I can't elaborate that on enough. It's got to understand, understand, understand. So understand that you may have your cultural understanding, and it may be vastly different than another's. An individual using biased language is not automatically a bad guy. See, I did that on purpose. I hope that comes across as clear. That's kind of a dad joke moment. They're not a bad person. Again, a lot of times, like we just talked about, it could be unconscious. It could be totally reflexive on their part. So it's not our job to make them feel like they are culturally deprived or that they are any less of a member of society for using that language. We just need to try to create an understanding for them that, hey, this could be viewed in a way that you might not be aware of. So maybe let's work through that. All right, here, let's get into some tools and techniques. Um, I found a really cool reference guide by the University of Leicester and their student learning development department. Some of these are kind of wordy, but let's go through them. So you want to avoid implying that people in a certain group are abnormal compared with a normal population. Example: when comparing people with a disability with people who do not have the particular disability, use the term non-disabled or people without a disability rather than the word normal. Again, what is normal? Are any of us normal in the grand scheme of things? I highly doubt that. Um, Next, take care not to appear to use your own group as the reference group, implying both normality and superiority. Describing a culture as culturally deprived implies that it fails in comparison with usually Western culture. And I think a lot of times this is what a lot of folks would consider non-whites. I think that's people assume that to be the dominant culture, white culture to be the dominant culture, or American culture, and that's not the case. This world is, I mean, it's full of amazing people, amazing cultures, amazing backgrounds. So never assume that yours is the normal one. Keep in mind that differences arising from race or ethnic comparisons do not imply deficits. Because somebody is of a different ethnic origin or a different economic background does not mean that they are less of a person or that we are less of a person. Um, I think that's a pretty common sense one, and it's simplified. Try to become routinely aware of any assumptions you are making regarding gender, race, disability, sexual orientation, or any other pattern or group. And become familiar with websites, books, or articles that give good guidance on the issue, such as those listed on the first page. Now, we'll look at some of the references that this particular page had to offer, as well as some other ones that I found going forward. So, getting into the specifics of it, so tools and techniques regarding gender. Um, I'm not going to go into, I'm not going to read these things verbatim, but here using they instead of he or she, only when the use of plurals would be acceptable. For example, each respondent was asked whether he wished to participate. Again, it's like that job posting we saw. Using that word he is assuming that every single respondent was a male, which is probably not the case. So the suggested alternative, respondents were asked whether they wish to participate. Again, one simple word replacement, thereby, it includes 100% of the people instead of excluding half of them. Use you to speak direct to the reader. The student should make sure she checks her references carefully. Again, she is separating women from men who are reading this. Suggested alternative: you should make sure you check your references carefully. Again, that's not making a particular reference to any group, any gender, anything. That is inclusive of anybody who may be reading that. So that's gender. I feel like personally that's probably the most common one that we see. Um, the most commonly talked about one. So we'll kind of gloss through that one. But here are some replacement words. Manpower. That's an outdated phrase. We can use workforce, labor force, employees, staff. There's tons of other words to use. Cameraman, camera operator, policeman, police officer, forefathers, ancestors. Man-made, artificial, synthetic. Again, these are terms that have been around for a long time and people have become comfortable with using. But we have to be aware that simply having the term man in here, in any of these, can make a reader feel like they either don't belong to be, reading that article, or whatever the intended information is does not pertain to them simply because they are not a man. And again, get a thesaurus. There's so many words out there. There's so many cool words that we don't even use anymore. That we could replace a lot of this stuff with, and again make it more inclusive. Sexual orientation. So even the term sexual preference is problematic. It's kind of an assuming term. So the preferred usage is sexual orientation, and that being, orientation avoids the connotation of voluntary choice. and thereby potential blame, which is implied with the word preference. So again, it's not words of he, she, man, woman. It's simple words that have connotations that could be viewed as negative. Uh, like we see here, preference versus orientation. Women's sexual partners should use condoms. Preferred women's male sexual partner should use condoms. Yeah, that first sentence is implying and assuming that women just have sex with men. Again, we're not going to get into a sex ed, lesson here, but that assumption could be very, very offensive to anybody that is going maybe requesting literature on condoms or safe sex. So just making that specified that should it be a male sexual partner, they should use condoms. Again, it avoids assumption of heterosexuality. Let's go on to disabilities. I'll read through this because this one was very interesting to me. People with a disability usually prefer to be thought of first as individual people, and I think that's true for all of us. We want to be recognized as an individual, not as a part, being defined as a larger group. They prefer not to be labeled primarily as victims, passively disabled, or labeled constantly with the name of their disability. The aim is to maintain the integrity of individuals. Again, if somebody is has to use a wheelchair, that wheelchair does not define that individual. That person using the wheelchair is who we're looking at. That individual. So the term disabled person implies that a person as a whole is disabled. It could be replaced with person with or who has a disability. Again, we're putting the person first, disability second. The term epileptic equates the person with their condition. Instead, you could write person with epilepsy. Right. If you have a friend or a family member that's epileptic, that's not. In fact, that's probably not even the most interesting thing about them. I can almost guarantee that. So we want to look at the individual. We do not want to look at whatever condition it is that they have. The term stroke victim has superfluous negative overtones of passivity and victimhood. It would be preferable to write individual who had a stroke. Again, it's a person. They don't want to be looked at as a victim. They don't want to be looked at as a victim of a stroke that's their defining quality. No, there's tons more to each and every individual out there. And the term confined to a wheelchair, that's little phrase alone, confined. That means that they're just stuck there. That has such a negative connotation. We could replace that with a person who uses a wheelchair. That's what they're doing. They're using a wheelchair just as we use I'm using a chair right now. I'm sitting in a computer chair. I'm using that chair. This computer chair does not define me, just as a wheelchair does not define anybody who uses it. And again, just kind of tying it around full circle. All of these suggestions put the individual first and refer to their disability second. So, as looking at it through the lens of a copy editor, from these last three things: disability, sexual orientation, and gender. These are all things that we need to, as copy editors, catch, be mindful of, and again, make writers aware of some of these pitfalls. Um, if they're a fiction writer, confined to a wheelchair might be more applicable with the tone and subject matter of their work. But more often than not, if it's corporate literature, if it's something informative, something that's going out to the general public, we don't want to be using that language. We want everybody to feel as included and as respected and as regarded as individual as possible. Race. So here are just some very specific, some words that have been used in the past that are no longer accepted as proper, versus some preferred, actually the preferred alternatives and the versions that we should use. So I'll let you read through these. I don't think I need to read them out loud. A lot of them again should make sense, but there are people in the world who still, whether it's handed down from generations, that was what their parents or families talked about while they were growing up, so it just kind of became ingrained in their memory to use terms like that. But there are tons of other proper, inclusive alternatives to use than some of these outdated terms. I'll give you a couple seconds to look over this. Okay, going forward. other areas to be mindful of. So the same guidelines and tips covered previously can also be applied to the following groups: age, faith and religion, socioeconomic status, all of this stuff, all of these areas where people are different. People, I mean, it sounds silly to say, but people have different ages, and some people feel differently about that. Whether they are older or younger, we need to be mindful of not saying, you know, separating the elderly or separating the youth when it's not necessary. There's no need to call attention to that unless it's necessary if we're talking demographics and statistics on a certain topic, or again, if it's a work of fiction. Faith and religion, socioeconomic status. Again, the same kind of tools and techniques that we covered in the last few slides with race, with sexual orientation, with gender. There are proper and acceptable alternatives to really. You have to think there's an alternative to any word that you can use. Like I referenced a thesaurus earlier. Any term you use has an or more likely many alternatives to use. So again, it's one where we're just trying to break this outdated nature of using terms that call attention to certain groups, that show certain groups in a negative light, exclude certain groups, certain people of different ages, certain people of different faiths, certain people of different financial backgrounds. Again, us copy editors have to be constantly on the lookout for that. You know, Earlier the word preference over orientation in terms of sexual orientation. That's a word that we might just be glossing through, going along reading something, and we skip right over that word just because it looks like a normal word. But we need to be looking at the tone. We need to be looking at what message this sends out to the reader, and catching every single one of these instances that we can, and giving it back to the writer and saying, hey, look, I read this. I'm curious what who you were intending this for, because I think that this specific word or this specific phrase might be looked at negatively. It might be disrespectful, or it might be offensive to somebody. So let's try to fix this if we can. Some helpful resources I found. I'm going to put them all up, and then I'm hoping that this screenshot or the screen record will help, or we'll be able to view these, because these are really cool. This first one, University of Missouri's glossary of terms. Let's get it to load here. This one was really neat. If it ever loads, here we go. Well, slowly but surely. It's the language of identity as they've deemed it, and it covers really all of these topics. Ability. Here's a glossary of terms to use, and like a good glossary, a pretty good definition of each of these terms. Some of the basic terms, when talking about inclusion and diversity, gender and sexuality, faith and religion, race, ethnicity, and national origin, socioeconomic status, safety issues. This is just, and it's got a ton of other resources. Now, these are more specific to University of Missouri, but these are really, really helpful terms to just have. This is a really good website to go ahead and bookmark, and to rely on as copy editors, or really just as casual readers. This is some very helpful information, some very helpful definitions to use. So next is Karen Yin's Conscious Style Guide. This is really cool too. Hopefully it doesn't take as long to load as the first one. So this is an entire style guide dedicated to consciousness, to understanding, and to inclusive language. And again, this is for anyone curious or serious about conscious language. And especially as copy editors, we need to fit into this, probably this part, the serious part, more so than the curious part. But again, this is a whole slew of articles. Conscious language in the American Heritage Dictionary, drop the hyphen in Asian American. So it's a style guide. It's techniques, it's technicalities, as well as just kind of an updated view of what is currently acceptable and what is becoming outdated. And so Karen Yin, I'll go over this kind of to talk a little bit more about her. Um, she's an award-winning professional editor, creator of AP versus Chicago. So she is in the realm of copy editing. She's an award winner. She's a published author. She is an authority on the matter. So this isn't just kind of some, quick fly-by-night website that someone slapped together. This is an actual professionally done website, and it's very helpful. A lot of these articles were really interesting, and again, I've got this bookmarked um, to going forward to look over. And finally, the UNC at Chapel Hill's quick tip guide. Again, this is just kind of an overall reference guide, just like the University of Leicester's, some of those references that I used in the previous slides. This is just a real quick look, kind of a quick reference that we could have, again, bookmarked up here to go to from time to time if we're unsure, if we can't remember something, or if we're just looking to brush up our skills. And it's really, really helpful. So final notes, just some stuff that came to my mind when researching and going over this stuff. And again, and it's a bad assumption to assume that a lot of this stuff is and should be common sense. It's not. So just some things that kind of drummed up in my mind. Depending on the text, biased or exclusive language may be necessary. Ask questions, query away. I've talked earlier about some, maybe it's a work of fiction. Maybe there's a character who is a racist, and there needs to be some terminology in there to kind of highlight that. But a lot of times, copy editors are getting professional literature, nonfiction stuff, directives, memos, stuff that's going out to the general public. And so we need to be making sure that we are trying to catch these instances and asking the questions, not just fixing it on our own, assuming that we're right and they are wrong. We need to have a dialogue with the writer and make sure that we are both on the same page. Um, Again, it does not make a person bad just because they use language that is not inclusive. We have to be patient and understanding when discussing with the writer. Um, Again, it could be a matter of ignorance. It could be a matter of upbringing. There's so many different factors that play into this, and we can't just assume that a person is a racist or is trying to offend or exclude any group or groups just because of the language they use. It could be complete accident. It could be again reflex. There still may be people who take offense to specific language. You, as a copy editor, could do everything in your power to try to fix something and make it as non-offensive and inclusive as possible. But there's still, like I said, language evolves. There still might be people out there who read it and find a negative connotation or find some offense in it. Again, we have to be patient and understanding as to why. We can't just immediately launch into defending ourselves. We have to listen and understand why and hear these points, and then it's okay again to create a dialogue, and then kind of give your understanding or your understanding as it was when you made that correction or when you wrote that. But again, we can't assume A is right and B is wrong. We are right, they are wrong, and vice versa. We have to talk. We have to understand why certain things are being viewed in certain ways. And again, use resources to continue to educate yourself. There are tons of resources out there that can be found with a simple Google search. A lot of my research, it was easy. You do a little bit of digging, but it was easy, and a lot of it was actual academic. Harvard University, University of North Carolina, Missouri, stuff that we've seen already in these slides. A lot of it is official academically researched and published stuff. There's tons and tons of resources out there. Read it, get comfortable with it, get knowledgeable with it, and then again, as copy editors, go out there and apply it. Let's catch these things. Let's make sure we're understanding as understanding as possible, and make sure that the text that has been leaving our hands and going out to the general public is as inclusive as possible. So that's it. Thank you for listening. That's about, oh gosh, I just went 30 minutes. So I hope it made sense. I hope that you found maybe something new that you didn't know prior, something that was interesting, and maybe some helpful tips. to use. And again, like I said, I look forward to applying this as I go forward in my academic pursuits and my professional pursuits. Thank you.